Hello everyone. With Christmas coming up, I thought I would make some stockings and I didn't have a pattern. So I figured why not just try to draw my own and see how it would work out. So this is what I did, but I did want my pattern to work for fat quarters because I didn't want to buy a whole bunch of yardage and I had this Christmas fabric in fat quarters, so I figured I would try to get it to work with this. So I picked three fabrics, one for my outer layer and one for my lining and then one for my cuff. So let's get started and make some stockings. I'm just going to double check to make sure that my pattern is going to work for this fat quarter. So I am just folding it in half here and then I'm just going to lay it on there. I just need to make sure that I'm going to have enough room because I do want to quilt this piece before I cut out my stocking and it might shift a little bit. So I don't have a lot of wiggle room as you can see, but I wanted this to work for fat quarters and it does. So I just took my whole fat quarter, I just gave it a press. I didn't cut it or anything, square it up, just laid it on a piece of batting, and then I just marked some quilting lines with my masking tape. And I figured I would just do some straight line quilting, nothing fancy. And I ended up just doing on the diagonal. I didn't even bother doing like a cross hatch or anything. And I just popped a few pins in here just to hold everything in place so that it wouldn't shift around while I was sewing. It probably wouldn't even have been necessary. It was such a small piece, it totally worked fine. For my lining fabric, I just take my whole fat quarter. Again, I didn't square it up or cut it, and I fold it in half, making sure that your right sides are touching because we want these pieces to be mirrored. If we don't have two opposite pieces of our stocking, we won't be able to sew it together correctly. And if I do it like this, I can cut both pieces at the same time and they will be perfectly mirrored and I don't have to worry about accidentally forgetting to switch the orientation of my stocking. And then this way it just will be right when I go to sew it together. Once I have finished cutting it out, I will just remove my pattern piece. And because I cut them at the same time and I put right sides together, this is ready to be sewn. So I'm just going to pop some clips in. But on the bottom here, we do need to leave an opening. That is going to be so that we can turn it right side out later on. So I'm just going to grab a pen and then I'm just going to mark my spots here because I have forgotten in the past when I'm supposed to leave an opening and then I didn't. So for this piece, I've already quilted it. And like I said, I was just going to do one straight line on the diagonal. And I do need to cut these mirrored as well, but because my batting is slightly bigger than my fat quarter, I'm folding it wrong sides together. I can just cut these out like this and then just switch the pieces out and it'll work just fine. But I just wanted to make sure that I didn't also accidentally place my pattern piece off of my fabric and then, well, it wouldn't work and then I'd have to redo it and I wasted this piece. So I just did this and then I'm just going to cut it out the same way as I did before and then I will put my stocking pieces right sides together and then sew it together. And this is a little bit harder to cut because it is a lot of layers and, well, batting. Then once I finish cutting them out, I just put them right sides together and I'm going to head over to the sewing machine. Sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and at the end of every seam here because, well, we want to make sure that it's nice and secure and our stitches aren't going to come undone. And it's a lot of curves, so just go slow and just take your time. And if you need to stop, put your needle down and readjust. And for the lining, it's the same thing. So with a 1/4 inch seam. And this one, we are not going to be sewing all the way around because we did mark our little opening on the bottom there. Make sure that you are back stitching at the beginning and the end of that as well, because we are going to be using this hole to turn everything right side out later on. And we don't want those stitches to pop open while we're pulling another stocking through there. All right, so we have both our lining stocking and our outer stocking sewn together, minus the top and then the opening for turning later on. So I'm going to be using my pinking shears and cutting around the outer edge. This is just going to help those curves to lay nicer. If you don't have pinking shears, just use your scissors and very carefully cut some notches out, and that'll help too. Just make sure that you don't cut too far in and end up cutting your stitches. The lining fabric was actually very easy to do, but the the stocking one was a little bit more difficult because of all the layers, but it actually wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. So I'm just going to do the same thing with my outer piece here. I don't need to go all the way up on the straight edge, just go around the curves. And then we can move on to making our cuff and our little hanging loop. For the cuff, I cut a piece of fabric at 15 inches by 8.5, and then I folded it in half the long way. And I just gave it a press. This way I had a crease here, and that's just going to be for later on to help. But now we need to sew it together first, so we're just going to fold it like this. And we need to sew with a 1/4 inch seam along that edge right there. And then for the hanging loop, I just cut a piece that was 2 inches by 7 inches. And then I folded my sides in a 1/4 inch and gave them a good press. And then I folded that in half and gave it another good press. And then I'm just going to top stitch this 1/8 of an inch on both sides. And these stockings would come together fairly quickly if you've done a few. I finished top stitching this, but I did use a coordinating thread so you can't really see it. And now we're just going to start working on our cuff here. And for this one, all I did is I just kind of opened up my seam here, and it took me a while to find it and open it up. I struggled a little bit. But I'm just going to finger press this open. I'm not going to bother taking it over to the ironing board or anything like that. And then I just opened it up with my fingers and I gave it a good finger press. I didn't feel like going over to the ironing station or anything like that. But if you wanted to take it to the ironing station and iron it, feel free to do so. I was just being a little bit lazy here. Now we need to fold this in half, and I'm not really sure how to explain it other than just kind of fold it in half with wrong sides touching, and this way we will have our little cuff. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to find my seams, and I'm just going to try to match those seams up nicely, making sure that they are open. And well, maybe I should have taken it to the ironing station here because they didn't really want to stay open, and I struggled with it a little bit, but basically just finagle and finagle it around until it works and you end up having a nice looking cuff. You can just watch me struggle trying to get it done here. I'm going to try to get this template so that you guys can download it. I'm going to see if I can get it done before I upload this video. Hopefully I can. And then if you want this pattern, you can just download it for free. It will be linked in the description box below. So now that we have all of our pieces done, we are ready to start assembling it. But before we do that, we're going to take our outer layer and we're going to turn this one the right way. The lining is going to stay the way it is. We don't need that one turned the right way yet. So I'm just going to put my fingers or my hand in here and then just use my fingers to run it along the seam there and just push it out and try to get it to lie as smooth as possible. And I'm not going to worry about pressing it here. I do press it once I have the whole thing done. But now that I'm ready to do this, we're going to add the cuff, and I'm going to make sure that that seam is going to be matched up with the seam on the back side of the stocking, I guess. So we're just going to slide the cuff over our stocking here, making sure that everything is in there nice and neat. And we're going to match up all of our seams. Well, I guess not all of our seams, just the back seams here. But just kind of get your fingers in there and figure it out. And then what I do is I put those seams together, making sure that stocking seam is open as well. And then I'm going to put a clip in there. And in this way, I can just kind of shake it out and just kind of pull it nice and tight and then line everything up, making sure that my top edges are all nice and flush. And make sure you don't accidentally put this cuff on upside down because you want your folded edge to be facing down and your raw edges to be are all together. And then I just put some clips in there to hold it in place. But now we are ready to add our hanging loop. And this is a little bit longer than what you need it, but I figured that way then you can decide on how long you want it to be. But I'm just going to fold it in half, and you do need to decide which way you want your stocking to hang. And all I do is I'm just kind of going to place my little loop over here and then hold it with my finger. And if I were to do it like this, then my stocking would be pointing towards the right. But if you wanted it pointing to the left, then just put it on the other side. And it's just basically hold it up, figure out which way you want it to hang, and then that's how you're going to decide where you want your hanging loop to be. And I want mine hanging so that the toe is pointing towards the right. So I'm going to place it so that it's going to hang that way. But before I actually clip it in place or anything, I am going to kind of see how long I want that loop to be. And then I'm just going to pop a clip in there. So I do have it sticking over the top edge there, but I'll just trim that off later on. But now we are ready to put it into our lining. So now we got to stuff that whole outer layer inside of here. And for me, I just kind of start like this, and then I will actually, once again, just stick my whole hand in here and then just use that to push it in there all the way to the bottom. I just find that it's easier if I do it like this than if I just, I don't know, try to shove it in there. But again, we're just going to have to make sure that all of our edges are lined up nice and neat and making sure that our seams are matching up. So I'm just going to make sure that all of my seams are matching up here before I clip anything and making sure that my raw edges are nice and flush because we don't want one hanging a little bit lower than the other one. It's just going to sit nicer if everything is nice and flush before we sew it together. And here too, I'm just going to match up my seams and then pull everything nice and tight and stretch it out a little bit and then just move my clips to hold everything in place. And then just take it over to the sewing machine and sew this with a 1/4 inch seam. And again, making sure that you're back stitching. And by the hanging loop, it would be advisable to backstitch here. I forgot, but I did go back over it a few more times after I was done because we want that to be nice and secure because once you have this full of goodies, it's going to have some weight to it. So you just want to make sure that it's going to hold. So I'm just going to clip off that extra from the hanging loop there because we no longer need that. All right, we are ready to turn this right side out. So you just reach into that opening that you left in the lining there, and just pull your outer stocking through. And then we're just going to use that same hole to turn our lining right side out. And here too, just go a little bit slow. You don't want to go too hard and risk ripping any stitches. Then I'm just going to reach in there with my hand and just going to smooth out all these seams and kind of push them out so that they're lying nice and flat. And then we're going to have to close up that opening, and you can either machine stitch this or hand stitch this. I'm going to machine stitch this because, well, I don't feel like hand sewing right now. And I need to make more of these stockings so that I have some for all of my kids. But once you have that opening closed up, then we are ready to just stick this lining right back in there. So you just want to shove that in there and just, for me, I just again stick my hand in there and kind of push it all the way into the toe area there and try to get it to lay as smooth as I can. Just because when you want to have it hanging, you want it to look nice and flat and not have it all crumpled up. Once it's full of goodies, it won't be flat, but if it's just hanging empty, then you want it to look nice. Now on the top part here, I'm just going to use my fingers to try to smooth it out as good as I can and just kind of roll that seam so it's nice and flush with everything. You could do it so that the lining is sticking over about a quarter of an inch and you'd have a little bit of extra trim there, but I'm not going to do that version. I'm just going to do it like this. This is what my little self-drafted pattern looks like, and I'm actually very happy with the way it turned out. I don't have a pretty mantle to hang stockings up on, so I was just going to plan on using command hooks and sticking them to the wall, just so that my kids can still enjoy stockings. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful. Thank you so much for stopping by, and until next time.